Hey, this is Seth at Music Teachers Muse. Tune in Fridays PST at midnight for new episodes. See you there. Hey, welcome back to Music Teachers Muse. So today we are discussing holding your students accountable for their progress and or lack of and their care of their instrument. So, reiterating what we've talked about in previous episodes, remember that the majority of your students, if you teach very much at all, are going to be kids. So, that being said, there is too many variables to cover, otherwise, this would be an hour-long video. But you have to keep that in mind on a constant basis. So, there's always some leeway here. Like, you can't berate the kid for not practicing. You can say, you didn't practice and you're in trouble now. That's not going to keep you booked with students. It's going to make the kid cry. It's going to make the kid feel bad. I've had kids cry in lessons before. It's not a pleasant experience. You do not want that child to be crying when they walk out of the room. Keep in mind that that's something that you have to weigh at every step of the way, no matter how long you've been doing this job. As we've also discussed in previous lessons, you have to remember that most of your students don't practice at all, or they don't practice regularly enough to get very proficient on the instrument. And again, that has nothing to do with you. You're not a miracle worker. You are not responsible for their progress. So that's where we come to the student accountability. Now, I'm fortunate where I've never had a parent or anybody who's paying for the lessons act like it was my job to make said student into a pro or even like a halfway decent player. I've had my original guitar teacher, Scotty. What's up, man? He said he had kids or people come to him and like pissed off at him years ago because they thought it was his job to turn him into Jimi Hendrix. I'm fortunate I've never dealt with any of that because I let them know it's not my job to do that. It's our job to teach them the skills, give them the best advice we can, correct them when they're playing things incorrectly, praise them when they are playing things correctly, and give them some options that are still applicable, that work. There's plenty of ways to play certain things. Some things you play exactly one way, you can't do it any other way. They're usually a couple, three different ways, especially with like guitar or bass, case by case basis. So let's dive into the student accountability. So point number one we're going to cover is, should you care about your students' progress? And the answer is always yes. You're a teacher. It's your job to inspire. And if you're not doing that, you're not a very good teacher. I've had students come to me from other teachers who were too strict, too lenient, and they literally just didn't give the student the right tools to where they even could understand what was going on, or they were so vague or gave them improper information to where the student was not able to even do the homework correctly and learn how to play the parts or whatever they were working on properly. So you always should care about your students' progress. And again, sometimes you care more, sometimes you care less, but it's something you definitely want to keep at least, and even if you don't care, because there's some students you won't. It's just, and it sounds bad, but it's just, this is a reality. You want to leave the illusion that you care because you want yourself to look good. So even if the kid can't get the same thing, you've been working on the same riff for a month, when the student comes, when you walk them out of the room to the parent, like, yeah, he's really doing good, he's struggling a little bit today, but it's to the point where maybe we should try working on something else, give him a little break, and we'll go back to that. You always want to be reinforcing the positive. So you should always care anyway, because again, if you're doing this for a living like I do, this is your source of income. So when you lose students, you lose money. We don't like that. It's never good. So, but it's also the student's responsibility to care about their progress too. So this is where it comes into, this is where you hold the student accountable, because it's not your job to make them practice. And as we covered on the practicing dilemma episode that's coming up, you can't make them practice. I don't have any idea what the magic formula is getting them to do so, because I've the closest I've come to getting them to practice regularly is literally make them a practice schedule with like every other day, and then write down what they have to practice. If you tell them to try to just practice something different, they won't do it. You'll have to write it down where they can see it. But that's the only thing I've even come close to having be somewhat successful. Otherwise, they always have an excuse. So, when should you not care about your students' progress? Because it'll happen at some point when you can tell that they don't give a damn. That's when you can pretty much say, okay, they're just here to pay me, and if they're going to waste their time, that's just that student or that group of students who doesn't, because we're all going to have them. Even the school I went to, man, it was ridiculous. I was one guy in a class of 20 or 30 who did the homework a lot of the weeks that they assigned an assignment. He's like, Seth got the gig because he did the assignment. You know, you guys bombed the audition. So it's one of those things where I came to a point last year. I remember venting to the guy booking the lessons. I'm like, I'm done giving a damn if they practice or not. And it sucks to come to that, but if you don't get there, it won't eat you up and make you go insane. But it's something you have to come to some sort of peace with, because no matter how much you tell them you need to do this or that or whatever you're trying to get them to play properly or focus on or practice more, you can only say that so many times. Like you're just beating a dead horse after a while. So it's really comes down to, you want to care as much as humanly possible, but it's their responsibility to work on what you give them, because you're the expert and that's why they're paying you for that advice, because obviously they don't know what they're doing without your help. So this is also another thing that you really have to teach these kids is this is a valuable life lesson. It's being accountable for their own BS, which is something that everybody has to be. I know we're in the age of the millennials and they need their safe spaces and all that happy horse shit. Well, guess what? Life don't work that way. It says a lot of the time, and it's not fun and it's painful and it fucking sucks. But this is your job to teach them about life and reality. You're not just teaching music, you're teaching life skills. You're teaching them, like, hey, you come to your lesson unprepared. Like if you had a performance, I've had a couple of gigs where I ate shit on stage and looked like a total fool. And man, did I never do that again, because I felt like a dumbass, because you look bad. Your audience they might not laugh, but and I've never been booed on stage, but I wouldn't want to be. But the guys that you're on stage with, like, what, dude, you didn't practice this? You were at a gig now. You look like a dumbass. And like if you're late to work enough times, they could fire you or cut your hours, and any number of things where you're not prepared for something that you have known like a week ahead of time that you were supposed to be, can have dire and unpleasant consequences. And a lot of these kids, especially these days, they're babied so much that they don't get that. Even their own parents, like, my folks didn't have to do it often, but mom got the wooden spoon out and dad got out the belt, and I remembered I didn't like it because it fucking hurt. An angry woman with a wooden spoon chasing your ass across the backyard, when she catches you, it's going to hurt worse versus you just stand there and take it. This is something that kids need to be taught, because they're not getting it in school. They're, from what I understand, and a lot of times they're not getting it at home either, because the way society is just babied them to where everybody's a winner and all this other happy horse shit that doesn't apply to real life or any kind of reality. So when they don't practice, don't berate them, don't make them feel bad, but you gotta know there's some consequences for that. It's like, you didn't practice, so you're not prepared, so we can't move on, or you had a week to work on this, and they'll have every excuse in the book as to why they didn't. But it literally just boils down to, you need to not necessarily beat it into their head, but let them know that's not acceptable. Like if they have a recital and then they look bad in front of everybody and they get embarrassed because they didn't know their part. Stage fright's one thing, but not having worked on it, not knowing it at all, and then showing up and not playing it right, that's embarrassing. That's not something I would want any of my students to experience, and it actually hasn't happened. but I know how embarrassing it would be. But unfortunately, they don't understand what that's like until it actually does happen. So if it does, it's a good lesson for them to learn, but you've got to try to instill in them that this is something that can't be understated, because life just doesn't work like, well, I just forgot, so it's no problem. It's like you inconvenience everybody else around you, you make yourself look bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's definitely something that you want to make sure that you make very clear. Now, in addition to that, you want to make sure that you're always positively reinforcing what they're working on to whoever's paying. Like we've talked about, keeping the parents happy, giving the students what they want, you know. And I did cover that a little bit earlier in this lesson, but to reiterate that some more, it's just something you can't do enough, because even if they're struggling and not practicing that much, you still want to make it known that what they are practicing and when they do play, it's paying off, and it's still, they're still making some progress. It's just not what they want. Every parent thinks their kid should practice more than what they do. Period. If I had a nickel for every time a mom or a dad said they need to practice more, it's like, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But when they do practice and you can tell that they have, make sure you let them know they're doing a great job and they need to do more of it, because positive reinforcement is the only thing that's going to help. The last point of this lesson, it's also accountability for maintaining their instrument and being responsible for their materials. So we've talked about in the patience episode 2, where it was, like, you have to have a lot more patience with people in general, but especially kids, because they forget things all the time. And also, if I had a nickel for every time a student has come to a lesson where they were like, well, my mom didn't put my book in my gig bag, or my mom didn't do this, my mom didn't do that. I've told them several times, like, that's your guitar, that's your bass, that's your ukulele, it's your responsibility to put that book or that binder or whatever it is in the bag so you know it's there before you get to the lesson. Because they'll try to pawn it off on mom or dad or whoever, the housekeeper or the nanny, whoever it is, and that's, again, them avoiding responsibility because it's theirs. And that's a big thing too, taking responsibility for their own BS and their own personal belongings. It's like, if I go to a gig, and I mean, I've known of guys, I've never done this, but who forget to bring a damn guitar cable to a gig. That's on them, not anybody else. That's the last thing you should forget, but that's why you check before you leave, make sure you have everything you need. But, this is stuff that, again, kids aren't held accountable for, as far as I'm concerned anyway, because I've seen enough of this. And you don't want to make them feel bad, but you just have to reinforce it. It's their responsibility, as well as the instrument care. Like, this is part of those. This is kind of a two-parter here, where it's like, where should you stop? Where should you care, and where should you stop caring? You should stop caring when they stop caring. Like, one guy had his guitar on the strap and didn't have any strap locks, where you have the system where it literally locks the strap to the peg here, and he slung it over his back, and it was a junk Squire or something. It wasn't an expensive instrument at all, but I told him, I said, you're going to be sorry when that falls off of there and it's bye-bye guitar. He's like, oh, it's fallen off there several times. I'm like, okay, fine, you don't give a fuck, I don't either, because it's like, why should I if he doesn't? It's something that at that point, it doesn't do you any good to care. But especially with kids, I mean, adults will understand, because they understand how you earn money and all that. But with kids, it's a musical instrument, but you have to teach them to respect it. So you have to hold them accountable for that too. It's like, just like teaching them, you never ever like set a guitar up against something, because about the time you think it's not going to fall, it will. It absolutely will. Because I've done it like once or twice only, but it's not a good idea. You always put it on a stand or something that. Or even, like, I've seen people lean it up against their amps. As long as the headstock has something to fall onto, you're okay. But, this goes falling from a few feet on a hardwood floor or a concrete floor. It's ugly. It doesn't take much to snap off a headstock or a neck, or put a big crack in a finish. Like this guitar is completely refinished when a metal music stand fell into it. We did an episode on that that's coming up in the future. So, to reiterate here, so let's recap. So you're holding your student accountable for basic responsibility of whether they've practiced or not. So remember, you've got students who are kids primarily. You don't want to make them feel bad for not doing it, but you also don't want to let them get away with being lazy. So just reinforce whatever they're doing positively. When it comes down to they don't care, you can kind of stop caring, but never let whoever is paying, or the parents or anybody you're working with. I mean, you can vent to your coworkers about students who are a pain in your ass. That's part of the job, trust me. But and we all, as teachers, talk to each other. We say the same things. You know, we all have students we're not as fond of. They're not all angels, trust me. But you know, just convey that, and you do care, because it's a job that's rewarding, and you want to inspire, and you want to be proud of your students. But you know, when they don't deliver, you know, make sure that they know that that's not acceptable in whatever way you can get it across. Because the only way they're going to learn is by understanding that them not doing that has consequences. And make sure that you reinforce any progress they're making to the parent as positive, unless you have some major discrepancy, like the kid's just literally not getting in after months and months, and maybe they should take a break. It's not something I generally like to do, because I don't like to lose students, because then I have to make up that income with another student, and they don't always get that slot filled right away, especially if you're teaching privately. And then just the accountability of knowing how to care for their instrument and respecting it, and knowing it's something to value and not just throw around and knock around, and be cautious of, and also being responsible for being attentive with their materials and what they need to bring to the lesson, this, that, and the other. That's almost too many variables to list in this lesson, because a lot of times they come straight from school and they can't have time to go home to get their guitar or anything like that. But still, it's something that you need to let them know that it's their problem. Don't blame it on mom or dad or somebody else. Sometimes it is mom's fault, but they'll try to pawn that off a lot of the time as something that they're not responsible for. And a lot of times they don't do it to be brats. That's kind of their default thing. So you'll know, no, dude, that's your responsibility. So thanks for tuning in and watching. Please hit the bell for new videos. Subscribe, like, share. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Check out our sponsors in the description below. And we will see you next week.